This week on Newsnight, the state's Great Outdoors Initiative. They'll look at the bipartisan controversy over proposals for development projects in some state parks, including adding hotels and pickleball courts, and what it might say about the potential for future projects in Central Florida. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take a deep dive into the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, let's start with the top political news of the week here in Florida. No stories made bigger waves than the proposals released by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to develop parts of 9 Florida state parks. They include proposals for a 350-room hotel at Anastasia State Park near St. Augustine, just to our north, and now shelved plans for a golf course at Jonathan Dickinson State Park in Martin County to the south. Several lawmakers, including Senators Scott and Rubio, wrote a letter describing as, quote, ridiculous plans to rush through a vote by the state's Acquisition and Restoration Council on the proposals with minimal public input. In response, the Department of Environmental Protection released what it called fact checks on claims about the developments and scrapped plans for public meetings this week in favor of more extensive public input. It also set up a website for public feedback, citing what it described as, quote, overwhelming public interest. One Newsnight spoke this week with Ashley Kjellberg, founder of Stella Maris, a Brevard-based environmental research organization.
I don't think, how can I go there and play racket sports or something that's going to immensely entertain me? I think of a place that's going to rejuvenate me. And I don't think there's anything that's connecting or rejuvenating about placing golf courses of any type or even racket sports. Now, I am a person who plays tennis. I've played pickleball. I very much enjoy it. There is nothing connecting about putting that in a state park. It would be surrounded by a giant metal cage with a windscreen. So that's not something that's going to bring you closer to nature. It's going to section you off from nature. So being at a state park and doing those activities, they just don't seem like they go together. There's also the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of the natural side to a state park would be like ecosystem services. And that like natural landscape that's within a state park. It's important for habitats, for wildlife, for water purification, for rejuvenation of aquifers. There's a lot of different important aspects to a state park.
Ashley Kjellberg there. Meanwhile, Governor DeSantis addressed the state parks issue this week. He said he didn't know about the plans and said the Department of Environmental Protection was going back to the drawing board.
This was something that was leaked. It was not approved by me. I never saw that. It is, they're going back to the drawing board, talk to your local communities. Here's the thing. I'd rather not spend any money on this, right? I mean, if people don't want improvements, then don't do it. And so that'll be something that citizens can be able to do. They're not doing anything this year. They're going to go back and basically listen to folks. A lot of that stuff was just half-baked, and it was not ready for prime time when it was, and it was intentionally leaked out to a left-wing group to try to create a narrative. Since I've been governor, we've added over 250,000 acres to conservation land. We established a Florida Wildlife Corridor. So we've done a lot of stuff. And on the state parks, if there does need to be improvements, we're not going to take away any green space. We have an existing footprint, and you do. But I mean, if we do nothing, then that's fine with me.
Governor DeSantis there. Reminder, we are recording the show on Thursday morning, so things can change by airtime. They often do. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining us in the studio for the first time this week, Nick Jorgudio from the Community Paper. Good to see you, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming in. We always like to see new folks here on the show. Stephen Lemongello writes about politics for the Orlando Sentinel. Good to see you, Steve.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Coming back to the program. And Curtis McLeod, Spectrum News 13, also covers a bit of politics in his time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Good to see you, Curtis. Let me start with you on this one, Curtis, for a second. I mean, the governor says there's not going to be a golf course at Jonathan Dickinson State Park. Now, that was perhaps the most controversial proposal, right? What do we know about it?
Yeah, so, this right here, Steve, of course, ruffled a lot of feathers. A lot of people, up in arms about all of this. And we saw people saying that they don't want the land touched and they don't want anything developed here. A lot of environmental groups speaking out saying, hey, there are studies that need to be here. We don't want this land touched. So you got a lot of people saying that they don't want to see this happen. And then, of course, there are those interest groups who want to see this happen. They have a vested interest here. But a lot of people picketing, saying that this can't happen. Ultimately, we have seen them draw back and say that we're not going to move forward with this plan, at least not right now. We're still talking.
Yeah, we saw those protests around the state last weekend. I mean, the governor, Steve, says he didn't approve these plans, but his office has certainly been talking about them.
Oh yeah, one of his spokespeople has been defending it online. The DEP put out repeated statements about it. It's sort of unclear to see how we could not know about it. So this is probably it went really badly and there was a huge blowback. So he's obviously distancing himself from it. But of course whether he can continue to say that he totally did not know about this or nothing to do with it. I mean, he admitted that he met with one of the groups in April. It was pitched about it. So.
Yeah, that's the Folds of Honor group that he said he met with. I mean, talk about some of that bipartisan political blowback. What do you think that says about the governor's sway over his own party in the state, given the folks that we've seen come out about this?
Oh, well, a year and a half ago, he was a re-elected governor who won 20 points and was running for president. And now his presidential campaign has gone down in flames. He's going to be out as governor in 2 years, and other Republicans are looking and says he's not as powerful as he once was. We can oppose him on things. He's not going to be governor soon. He's essentially like a lame duck, and that sort of shows that where once anything he said was immediately backed by Republicans. Now Republicans are looking and they're saying he's weak, he's wounded. We don't really need to follow him off a cliff.
Yeah, the governor had said he didn't know about this, but certainly folks in his office, Nick, had been talking about this being a way to improve access to Florida state parks. How has the Department of Environmental Protection up to this point responded to this criticism itself?
Yeah, they took to X this week on a long thread and sort of gave some justifications on why they were thinking this. Some of it was there's already existing paved areas that they could easily turn into pickleball courts, or in one case, cabins at Grayson Beach State Park, which is up in the Panhandle, were booked all the time, so more access to overnight stays were needed. But then in the same statement, they would talk about 175 state parks in Florida have nearly 30 million visitors a year. This is according to around 2022, 2023 stats, an annual economic impact of $3.6 billion and supporting 50,000 jobs. So I guess the justification wasn't really there beyond we need more overnight stays.
Well, let's see how the Department of Environmental Protection eventually comes back down on this now that they're back to the drawing board. But I want to talk about another couple of political stories that have been making the news this week. And I want to start with the elections, if I can, and the primaries that we had. Orange County Commission races in your area, Nick, in districts 3 and 5. There weren't any winners that were declared as no one got over 50%. Can you remind us of the candidates in those races and what happens now?
Yeah, so District 3 will be going to a runoff in November. That is with Mayra Uribe, who is the incumbent. She's been part of the commission since 2018, versus Linda Stewart, who got 34.7% of the vote. Yeah, also of the Florida House and the county commission as well. So they got about 20,000 total votes for that election in August. And so they're looking for a bigger turnout, I think, is what both candidates are looking for there. And then in District 5, Emily Bonilla, who is the current district commissioner, she is termed out, so she won't be running again. So it's between Dr. Kelly Semrad, UCF professor of tourism, and Steve Leary, who has formerly worked at, or has been elected to, the Winter Park City Commission and has served as mayor there as well.
No race really was tighter, I think, than District 1, possibly the tightest in the state. Nicole Wilson against challenger Austin Arthur. How did it shake out, and what happens next?
Well,
Curtis?
now, I mean, look, we started on election night. We saw that they were down to 5 votes. That was on election night. Then by Thursday, separated by 2 votes here. 2 votes.
That's
and
it.
I'm like, oh my gosh, just 2 votes. This is pretty interesting here.
Yeah.
And now what we will see happen is there won't be a recount, but a runoff rather for this particular race here. And we'll see what happens. I know that there have been, and it's nonpartisan particularly, but we know each have their political leanings here and even interest on either side, but it'll be interesting to see what happens during that runoff when that runoff does happen here. I know it'll be very interesting because we've got a lot going on in Orange County, a lot going on with additional seats potentially being added and everything. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this particular race.
And development has been a big issue in District 1 over the years. Steve, I wanted to get your takeaways on these elections. You wrote a piece actually about mail-in voting falling significantly. What did you find out, and do we know why?
Oh, there's just a lot of reasons for that. First of all, 2020. Obviously, Democrats, voted by mail much more because of obviously what was going on with COVID, and that sort of Republicans, looked to Trump, who Trump looked at that and said, obviously, there's false claims of fraud and cheating and whatnot. So that became like a major issue for Republicans and conservatives, who were now, a lot of them are against voting by mail. So the Democrats went up, Republicans dropped, but at the same time, a lot of Democrats who did vote by mail in 2020, for whatever reason, decided not to do it this time, bringing that down. And then you have the Republicans who don't want to do it, from what they're hearing from Trump, and that's bringing that down. And plus, there's a new law that essentially your vote by mail requests disappear after 2 years. So before it was 4 years, you just sign up to vote by mail, and just for the next 2 major elections, city elections, for 4 years, you'd be getting these just mail-in ballots without thinking about it. Now, as of 2023, January 1st, they just all disappeared off the face of the earth, and they will disappear again off the face of the earth after this election in January 25. So there's just a lot of people, especially since in the Democratic Party there was no presidential primary, who just haven't gotten around or didn't even realize that they have to sign up again.
Well, we'll see if that trend holds for the general election. Certainly voters have got a lot of different rules to navigate as we head towards November. Meanwhile, you can find links to Florida's Great Outdoors Initiative, including details of the proposals and the survey for public feedback on our website. It's at wcf.org/Newsnight. Okay, next tonight, let's get an update on the work of the Pulse Memorial Advisory Committee, which met again last week. The aim of the most recent meeting, to hear from survivors and family members who do not sit on the committee. The body is tasked by the City of Orlando to develop a permanent memorial 8 years after the tragedy.
For all the survivors, I am grateful for you guys, and this will be one of the moments in your life. But for my mother, this was the last moment of her life. And with that being said, I think that we should put more focus on the 49 people that didn't survive, because there's no one here to tell their story.
Robert Presley there. Nick, you've attended these meetings. Mm-hmm. One of the issues that sort of stood out to me is kind of this tension between whether they should mostly memorialize the victims, whether survivors should be included as well. What stood out to you?
Yeah, there were a couple of conversations around that, and several survivors called in, those who weren't on the committee. Yeah. So the committee is 18 people, and they're hearing from as many people as possible, not only survivors, but family, community members, et cetera. And many of the survivors are saying the survivors can wait as far as being memorialized in whatever ends up being built on the Pulse property. Another thing that they said was they wanted it to be a place to educate people on what happened there, but also a place of joy. Some of the words that you were hearing from the committee were faith and hope, and a place where you can commune with loved ones, for the places where their survivors and the family members could go be there. On the second day of the most recent meetings, on August 22nd, they did an exercise, a persona exercise, where they asked not only the committee members, but people who were giving comments to sort of put yourself into a different role, whether that was a family member, a survivor, a patron or employee of Pulse, a community member, and tell us what you would want to see as one of those personas. And that was pretty interesting. Many people actually chose children and students. That was the overwhelming choice.
Yeah.
So because they feel that it was important to convey not only what happened, but what happened afterwards, what happened to the community here and how we came together, not only locally, but nationally and internationally.
Certainly a lot of sensitivities here, and there are concerns, it seems to me, from family members over the makeup of that committee itself and sort of their connection to the tragedy. What do you think are the main concerns that you see emerging during these meetings?
Yeah, there were 150 people who applied and 18 people chosen. From a committee perspective, they couldn't have everybody on there, is my understanding. But it's a good sampling of the people, and there are still opportunities for people to come in and be part of it.
Yeah. Just remind us, Steve, about how Mayor Dyer has said he wants to see this process go forward.
Yes, obviously. You mentioned like the group that's made up of the 18 people, and a lot of these people they include like architects and things like that, and people like in terms of the design of it. But those people also have new people, new victims, no survivors. So there's even if the people who are the professionals, they also have like personal connections, and I think that's sort of what they want to do going forward. I guess they're still burned by what happened with One Pulse, and they want to make sure that the people in charge of this, do have connections and do have personal feelings about what happened and going forward.
Some news on the legal front regarding Pulse as well this week, Curtis.
Yes. We learned that through an investigation with OPD, they determined that the owners will not face involuntary manslaughter charges. One of the big cruxes of this, they say that the owners had no idea that an individual was going to come in and start doing what he did, shooting people on that day. So it's like they can't be held responsible for that. And all of this we know was started once family members, the victims and some of their family members filed police report saying that the owners should be held liable, should be held responsible. Negligence lawsuits, and that's what they were hoping for. But of course, this extensive investigation by OPD, several months. I don't think it was quite a year, but several months here that they looked into it and determined that the owners, Barbara and Rosario Palmer, will not be facing any involuntary manslaughter charges.
Which is, of course, what they had wanted. Meanwhile, we always want to hear your thoughts on the news of the week. Be sure to visit us on social media. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find us on X at Newsnight WUCF. All right, finally tonight, developments affecting Florida's hospitality industry. Let's talk about them one by one. First, a federal judge in Texas last week threw out a Biden administration ban on non-compete agreements that was due to take effect next Wednesday. Several major players in hospitality, including groups representing the hotel and restaurant industries, had staunchly opposed the Federal Trade Commission rule. The government could appeal the ruling, as Crystal Knowles reports.
Starting a new job can be exciting, the beginning of a new chapter. But what happens when that future involves an industry such as the hospitality and tourism sector, where non-competes are widely used? Non-competes are also standard in the broadcasting industry. Longtime journalist Valerie Boy.
As a reporter, I would sign a contract and then I would have a non-compete, meaning I would have to stay out for 6 months if I decided to leave the station or not renew my contract. And so I think it's a really great thing to get rid of the non-competes.
In April, the Federal Trade Commission created a rule that would do just that. The FTC's Douglas Farrar says the new rule aimed at giving lower wage earners a fighting chance at a time when the cost of living is so high.
Wages put back into millions of Americans' pockets. We're talking about over $500 a year.
According to the FTC, about 18% of U.S. workers have non-competes, which is about 1 in 5 people, and those industries can range anywhere between the medical all the way to the hospitality industry. According to the Economic Policy Institute, between 15 and 25% of hospitality workers are subject to one. In Central Florida alone, there are about 270,000 workers in the tourism industry. Industry groups, including the Restaurant Association, are not on board with the FTC rule, claiming it will reduce competition. During a recent congressional meeting, Republican Dave Joyce questioned the FTC's authority to ban non-competes, paving the way for what was to come next.
Under what statutory authority did the FTC issue the final rule prohibiting non-compete agreements and essentially nullify such contracts between employees and employers across the country?
The FTC Act prohibits unfair methods of competition, and the FTC has determined that non-compete clauses constitute unfair methods of competition, and so that was the authority that we did this under.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce filed a lawsuit joined by 2 Texas business groups, executives, and a tax firm, challenging the ban. And just last week, a federal judge in Texas blocked the FTC rule just days before it was set to take effect. Here's what Farrer said sometime before the ruling and what the game plan would be if the FTC did not prevail in the courts.
There will be appeals processes if we somehow don't win. Also, Congress has the ability to pass laws. And in fact, several members of Congress have proposed non-compete bans similar to the one we proposed. And on a bipartisan way, those members of Congress, the senators who wrote those bills, have endorsed the FTC's actions and our legal authority to carry this forward.
Crystal Knowles reporting. Okay, Nick, let me start with you on this one. Why does the hospitality industry, like the restaurant and lodging sectors, say it's opposed to these FTC rules on non-competes?
Yeah, the industry groups say that these don't apply to the line workers, the people who are working in the restaurants and the front and back of house. They mostly apply to the executives who know the secret sauce. And they don't want that getting out. They don't want necessarily anybody being able to take trade secrets or proprietary information from one organization to another. So that's their justification behind this.
Yeah, Curtis, I wanted to ask you about a separate case in the Villages. A judge ruled against the FTC in this case as well. Just tell us about that.
So essentially, Steve, here what they're looking for, they're trying to protect their interest here, and what's kind of what they say they proud the company on since it was founded back in the 80s, and they don't want, you know, any former sales associates or workers who work with them to be able to just start immediately being able to sell real estate in the area. There is a 24 non-compete that they want in place, that is in place, and they want to keep that there so that, you know, they can't just immediately go across the street. It's similar to what we see in broadcast. I mean, I've been in the TV news business for about 15 years or more, and pretty much every contract I've signed, there's a non-compete agreement in there where I can't just go across the street if for some reason I lose my employment. I have either, whether it be depending on the contract, 6 months to a year. One contract I think I remember was 2 years, where you have to wait a period of time so that you're not taking those quote unquote, as we mentioned earlier, the trade secrets from one shop to another and, you know, taking advantage on a market.
I want to pivot to a couple of other issues in the tourism sector if I can. Both the presidential candidates have said that they favor ending taxes on tips. Workers seem to like it, right? But economists don't. Do we have an idea about how such a move might affect the economy in Florida?
Yeah, I would say at the outset, it wouldn't have much of an effect because this would be federal taxes. So it wouldn't affect the economy of the Florida government. On a long term, what some economists are saying, it might affect income into the federal government of $10 billion to $25 billion a year, which those cuts would have to come from somewhere to make up that shortfall. So those might be federal programs or something along those lines. There's also a question of whether that applies to payroll tax, and whether the tips would still be taxed there for Social Security and Medicare as well. It's another long-term issue.
I mean, it's really interesting that both the presidential candidates have got on this issue. Do you think it's smart politics, Steve?
It is popular with folks, like initially, like, oh yeah, no taxes on tips. It's, like I said, economists are sort of wary about the idea, but, you know, I guess the idea is just get through the election and then worry about that afterwards. You know, so the other side doesn't have an advantage on that. But yeah, there's a lot of question about, you know, will this, impact, California that has higher minimum wages and people's, incomes are less more wage and less tips out there. Will it hurt them as opposed to places with a lower wage and like higher tips? Social Security taxes, things like that. There's also the issue of what counts as like a tip. There's worries that if you're a financial advisor, instead of taking like a straight percentage or something like that, oh no, just tip me. What can be a tip? Essentially, a lot of people will be, if there are no taxes on tips, will essentially just be taking much less salary and like a lot more in just tips. So that's the thing that really has to be looked at a lot.
Well, with the vice president and the former president both backing this idea, it's something that we'll probably be talking about again. Finally, a story that's made national news: the disappearance of information for LGBTQ travelers to Florida on the Visit Florida website. First, let's hear from the governor, who said he didn't know about that issue either, and he addressed it on Wednesday.
I was aware after the fact. I mean, look, our view as a state is we're the best place to visit. We're open to all, but we're not going to be segregating people by these different characteristics. That's not how we've done business in any of the things that we've done, and that's just not how we're operating. So we have people from all walks of life that come. They enjoy the state of Florida, and that's, I think, the way the policy has been. So I'm not sure how any of that stuff started or this. I am aware of it now, but I think nothing really changes in the fact that Florida is going to remain a great place to be.
Governor DeSantis there. Okay, Curtis, what information was removed from Visit Florida's site, and do we know why?
So we know that there was a landing page that was removed, Steve, and it provided information to Florida's gay-friendly beaches, also information about pride events, and also LGBTQ road trip ideas. We know that that was moved. Now, as far as to the breadth or the deep meaning behind why it was all removed, I haven't been able to glean or haven't found any information as to why it was removed. I know that I know the governor mentioned he was looking into it and trying to kind of see and saying that, a lot of it doesn't really change a lot of things, but I know there are a number of people, even in businesses, Visit Florida, it was a marketing tool, a marketing tool that they utilized.
I mean, Visit Orlando still has an LGBTQ section on its site. The governor says he didn't know about it, but certainly politically, it does seem to align with the priorities of the DeSantis administration. In fact, we heard him say that there.
Oh yeah, this essentially is in his wheelhouse of just, like you said, like talking about, advertising and marketing as sort of segregating. Like marketing and advertising are specifically, towards different segments.
Yeah.
But this goes along with, his LGBTQ policies, from day one.
A reminder, you can find much more Newsnight content on our website. Visit us online at wcf.org/Newsnight along the bottom of your screen. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Nick Jorgudio from the Community Paper. Thanks so much for coming in, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Stephen Lamangello from the Orlando Sentinel and Curtis McLeod from Spectrum News 13. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Really appreciate your time today. Newsnight will be taking a break next week, but we'll see you back here the following Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.